A place in history is truly defined by the company that one keeps. Babe Ruth, Mickey Mantle, David Ortiz, Hank Greenberg, Hack Wilson, Jimmy Fox. That's the company that Matt Olson finds him in after hitting a career milestone. As for me, Grant McAuley is the company that I keep here on BPTV. Grant, welcome back in as we ride in for another episode.
Thank you. I don't know if this is a milestone episode for us, but I know we got a lot to get into and a lot going on for the Atlanta Braves as we head down the stretch.
Yeah, that Olson milestone that he reached Thursday against the Pirates, 40 homers and 100 RBI through a team's first 113 games, putting him on a list that includes those Hall of Famers. And those are some nice round numbers that put Olson in his career season squarely in the spotlight. Now, across Braves history, in 1971, Hank Aaron was third in the MVP voting when he hit 47 homers while making the most starts that season at first base. Of course, Freddie Freeman won the MVP in 2020, that shortened season when he had an absurd 186 WRC plus. And I say this with no hyperbole, Grant. I think what we're seeing in Olson, who's 40 homers and 101 RBI, comes with 49 games to play. This has the makings of the best offensive season we have ever seen by a Braves first baseman.
Yeah, easily. And that's not a knock on either of those other guys. It's just a testament to what Matt Olson is doing and the numbers that he's putting up. You mentioned his 40th home run of the year. It came in the finale against the Pirates. It tied him with Shohei Ohtani for most home runs in baseball, set a new career high for him. And with 49 games to go, he can take aim at a bigger record. The single season record for home runs by a Braves player was set by Andrew Jones in 2005 with 51. Olson's got 49 games to hit 11 more homers to match, 12 or more if he wants to be the holder of that record, which I don't know that he set out this year to set it. But hey, you know, it just is, again, it's a testament to the consistency of the slugging that he's been doing, especially since moving to cleanup back a couple of months ago as the Braves really took off and really showed that this is a special offense. And Matt Olson's kind of the driving force. Ronald Acuna Jr. sets the table. A lot of other guys contribute to this, but right there in the middle, you have to have, I think, that feared slugger. And we're starting to see with the intentional walks, teams aren't really wanting a part of Matt Olson with runners on base. And a good reason why. He's leading Major League Baseball in runs batted in, has a chance to make a run at Hugh Duffy's record for the franchise in that regard as well. It's 145. Yeah. I believe he's on pace for 143. And oh, by the way, the home run pace, in case you're curious, 57 of those. That's a special season. I don't care what decade, what era, or what part of history you're talking about in baseball. Matt Olson's having himself quite the year.
Yeah, you mentioned those pace numbers. That 145 that Hugh Duffy had was in 1894. I mean, that tells you how long any Braves first baseman or anybody in general at the franchise has put together any kind of a season like this. Olson's WRC plus 155 is fourth among any Brave who spent at least 2/3 of a season playing first base. That's just 1% behind Andres Galarraga in 1998, Fred McGriff in 94 for the highest in a 162 game season. Freeman's, of course, 186 came in that shortened 2020 season. As I mentioned, Aaron had a 191 WRC plus in 71, but he played over 50% of his games that season at first. Obviously, that wasn't nearly 2/3 of the season, but Olson 975 OPS, that ranks fourth with McGriff, Galarraga, Freeman in 2017, the only full-time first baseman across ahead of him in that regard. And Galarraga, of course, he hit 44 homers in 98, Freeman 38 in 2019. Both those guys drove in 121 that season. It would take a collapse for Olson not to pass them. There's obviously a very strong chance, as you mentioned, that he eclipses Andrew Jones in those 51 homers in 2005. This is the season of Acuna, as you mentioned. I mean, it's very likely to end up with him holding the MVP, but it's really interesting that Olson has just been this absolute monster to the degree that we've never seen a Braves first baseman have this kind of a stat line. And it's like, when are people finally going to start talking about what Matt Olson is doing this year?
Well, what does it take to keep people's attention elsewhere? And the answer is a historic season like Ronald Acuna Jr. is having. And I know there's been a lot of talk about this on social media about some seasons other guys are having. And look, Freddie Freeman's having a great year. Mookie Betts is having a really nice year. So you got a couple of Dodgers out there, and I understand that they're a pretty good team year after year, and those guys are integral to their success. But you look at what Ronald Acuna Jr. is doing, and I just don't think that there's really an argument that somebody's going to take away the MVP from him if he just continues on. I mean, look at this road trip. You know, he may not be hitting as many home runs here of late, but he's still on pace for 38 of those. He's still on pace for, I believe, 75 to 76 stolen bases. You put that in with 145 runs scored, 200 plus hits, 40 plus doubles. I mean, the list goes on. He's cut his strikeout rate. I mean, the guy is just an unbelievable tour de force offensively. He just has another dimension that so many players don't have. So your question was about Matt Olson, but let me tell you how the attention can be taken from Matt Olson, and it's by a player like Ronald Acuna Jr., because what Olson is doing is exactly what the Braves wanted to see when they got him, have him be a run-producing bat in the heart of their order. I know he hit second a lot early on, and I think maybe we've discovered that his best use is a little bit lower in the order, and when you put guys on, this guy seems to really find another level. I know he's made some adjustments throughout the course of the year, went through that lull. People started to kind of wonder, hey, is Matt Olson going to snap out of it? We really need him to. That little lineup change that Brian Snitker finally committed to, and he said he'd been thinking about it for a while. Ozzie Albies has flourished in the 2 spot. Matt Olson has looked great at cleanup. I think all around that's kind of helped Austin Riley as he's really gotten off the schneid and been hitting a ton of home runs himself. So I guess what I would say to the question of how are people not so much noticing Olson, the big factor is Acuna. The other factor is this lineup is so beyond 1 or 2 players that it's just kind of an ensemble type cast. And I know Olson has said this time and again, it's not all on me. I don't feel the pressure to drive in the runs. I'm going up there trying to have the best at bat possible. And quite obviously, he's having a lot of his best at bats here lately.
Yeah, and I know Olson has said, look, he likes the fact that he's not getting all this attention, that he can kind of operate in this way. And I mean no disrespect to him or the season that he's having in regard to Acuna. It's just the fact that if he was on any other team, these MVP conversations that we're having where people are saying, what about this guy? What about that guy? They'd be saying, what about Matt Olson if he was wearing a different uniform other than a Braves one? Meanwhile, Max Fried has shown moments of his typical dominance since his return. And while he is coming off of his shortest start of his career, Spencer Strider continues to be on the Cy Young short list. But beyond that, the Braves rotation may have more questions than answers right now and heads into the weekend with MLB's second worst ERA since the All-Star break at 6.15. Charlie Morton has a 7.32 over his last 4 starts. Bryce Elder is at 5.36 since the calendar hit June. Yanni Chirinos has an 8.56 ERA in 3 starts since his Braves debut. Grant, what is the concern level with this rotation outside of Fried and Strider?
I mean, I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. Somebody asked me what my concern is about the entire starting staff, on a range of 1 to 10, and I said a 3. Because I don't feel like how they're pitching right now is indicative of the talent and the ability and the track record that each one of these guys, to different extents, has been able to show us both in this season and in the case of a couple of the veteran pitchers, a little bit longer than that. And of course, by veterans, I mean Max Fried and Charlie Morton. And we'll see what Kyle Wright can do to kind of help stabilize this staff maybe in September. But right now, the Braves have got to figure out individually and collectively in this rotation how to get more quality starts. I went back and looked at this. Since the start of July, I believe that's 32 games, if I'm not mistaken, the Braves starting staff owns 11 quality starts. That's not a high bar. That's 6 innings or more with 3 earned runs or less, and it's just not happening enough. I mean, it's about a third of the time, and lately it's something that's just not showing up at all. And the effects of that, obviously, are going to be felt on the bullpen, and I think Brian Snitker was managing that way in the finale against the Pirates, trying to get what he could out of Bryce Elder before asking the bullpen to come in and cover the final few frames, knowing some guys are going to be down and some guys weren't going to be available. So I don't know that Strider is going to spend too much time. You've seen him, you've talked to him, discussing his Cy Young chances. I think that there's going to be a fire lit under him to figure out what he can do to avoid the trouble innings, to be able to get deeper into the games. That's something he always talks about, well beyond the strikeouts. It's just that's how he pitches. That's just something that comes with the territory for him. But I don't worry as much about him, and I don't worry as much about Max Fried, as you said. But Charlie Morton, 4 consecutive starts or 4 consecutive losses for him heading into the weekend against the New York Mets. He's got to get it sorted out. Too many walks, too many hits. The home run ball hadn't really been a problem, but there's base runners all over the place, and the same thing is true for Bryce Elder, just with less swing and miss than Charlie Morton. So I thought Elder pitched a little bit better against the Pirates. Unfortunately, that 6th inning did not go his way. He wasn't able to get anybody out and left a couple of men on for Joe Jimenez, which is not a fun spot to be in as a reliever, I'm sure. But the Braves just need somebody to step up, and we're not going to spend too much time talking about Yanni Chirinos, I don't think, because I'm not sure that this is something that's going to go on too terribly much longer. The Braves are unbeaten in his 3 starts, which I pointed out on social media. People weren't happy to hear it, but it's one of the things that has contributed to how worn down this bullpen could be in a stretch where you've got 14 games in 13 days. This, Corey, is just kind of an amalgamation of things that aren't going right for the starting staff. But I do believe as we have 49 games left heading into the weekend series against the Mets, they can figure it out. They can turn it around, and they are better than they've pitched lately, but they've got to start showing it.
Yeah, I'm not trying to be Debbie or Danny down here for the best team in baseball. But since 2000, The game's leaders in F4 during the regular season have won 3 World Series. And the Braves are just a tick behind the Rangers for the overall lead. I just think saying the offensive domination is going to overshadow this. That's not a guarantee when you get to the postseason of a parade. And it certainly doesn't help that Fried, who you're expecting to be back to that guy who was the Cy Young runner-up last season, had a 30-pitch, 4-run 4th inning against the Pirates. But where else are the Braves going to turn? I mean, Michael Soroka's results have not been overwhelming. He had a really nice start last time out for Gwinnett, but he's not been that guy consistently. Kyle Wright, obviously a few weeks away. I just think it's concerning from the end that you get into a postseason series and whether or not this offense can continue to make up for the weak links in the rotation. But let's not forget those same arms that we're talking about struggling, Elder and Morton in particular. That's a big reason why this rotation ranks 6th in F4 across the season's first half.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, those were guys that were able to hold things together. And there was going to be a point in every season, I feel like, for most starters, you save the guys having career years and special seasons, the likes of which usually wins you a Cy Young Award. The Jacob deGroms of the world, the Clayton Kershaws, the guys that just never seem to falter over the course of 162. This is not a rotation full of those guys, but it is full of capable arms who did help the Braves really hold it together while they were trying to fill usually 2 spots in the rotation, and were doing that for the better part of the first 3 months of the season when you got exactly 10 starts out of Max Fried and Kyle Wright combined. Now, Fried, back in these first couple of starts, obviously super efficient, looked great against the Cubs. I don't know that there's any cause for alarm in that. In fact, I think there might have been a surprise for Max Fried and for the Braves and how great that was. The start against the Pirates and that 4-run inning in particular, there was a play that wasn't made defensively behind him that kind of hurt him, with Orlando Arcia getting caught with a ball he couldn't get out of his glove fast enough, and then things just kind of derailed a little bit for him. He did not look that bad. He did not get hit that hard, but I also feel like Brian Snitker was not about to send him back out there at basically 80 pitches to go throw more into a game in his second start back. So as Fried works his way back, I think we'll see more and more of the typical Fried and maybe more of what we saw in that start against the Cubs. And we'll see what the rest of these guys are able to do. For Bryce Elder, it's going to be, trying to do what he did so well, which was pitch in the margins to great success, generate a lot of ground balls, and find some success there. And Charlie Morton, he's just got to find a way to stop giving up hits and stop giving up walks, because the timely hitting that he's been giving up has not been helped by the extra base runners that have been out there for him. And to a certain extent, that could be said for Spencer Strider in his start against the Pirates. Some plays weren't made behind him either, but 3 walks did not help in that inning where he gave up 6 runs.
Well, no matter your beliefs on climate change, it is hard to argue that any singular entity has been more instrumental on a climate than what Michael Harris II has meant to the 9th spot in the Braves order. Since his April 28th return, the Braves are far and away the league's best team in that spot, leading an average OPS, weighted on base average, WRC plus. Harris's production since June 2nd has been simply ridiculous, ranking 6th overall in that span. He's hitting over 400 since the All-Star break. And while he's raking, the Braves are 29th in WRC plus from the 5th spot in the order, 15th at the 6th spot, and 29th at 7th. I guess you can say you don't mess with a good thing, but Grant, given the struggles in those spots ahead of him, should Harris move up in the order?
I wouldn't move him up in a spot to just put him at 5 or 6 and then drop some of those other guys down because of how well this has worked throughout the course of the season, and less about that, but more about what he's been able to do, along with Orlando Arcia of late as well, ahead of Ron Acuna Jr., Ozzie Albies, and Austin Riley, and Matt Olson for that matter, in really setting up some big innings for this club. I don't know that necessarily Harris profiles as a number 5 or number 6 hitter, but by the argument that a lot of us will give, yeah, you could get him more plate appearances. But I don't think they're going to want to move Ozzie Albies and put Michael Harris second and then move Ozzie down into the order. But they could do that. But again, I don't feel like they have really an offensive problem. We all look for ways to solve what's ailing them. But look, 9 guys are not going to be going in the same direction for long periods of time, let alone the entire season. I think you have to kind of ride it out. I think Travis d'Arnaud does enough offensively. Sean Murphy's going to figure his stuff out. There have been some highs and lows, certainly for Marcell Ozuna, and maybe even as much or more for Eddie Rosario, especially lately. But those are the guys that you got. You can mix in Kevin Pillar, give him some more opportunities in left field if you feel like that's something that could work. And then maybe you do elevate Arcia a little bit, and maybe you can mess with Harris. But I think, long answer short, I just wouldn't mess with a good thing because I feel like it's worked too long and too well for the Braves to really go trying to revamp something that I feel like in large part is not broken.
Well, guess what, Grant? There's only one spot in the order where Harris has been better than 9th, and that's 6th. where he has a 353 average and a 973 OPS in his short career. That he's only been there once this season and 13 times last season. So you can small sample size that, but that's what the numbers say. Anyway, the comfort level and production at ninth, where he's been in 134 games in his career these past 2 seasons, it's just undeniable. But I don't know, it might be time to consider something, considering how well he's been hitting of late. But does that move come over these next 4 games against the floundering Mets? The last time the Braves saw them back in June, they started Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander in the final 2 games of that series. They're obviously both now in the Lone Star State eyeing postseason burst. The Mets have dropped 7 of 9, or a whopping 20.5 games back in the NL East. What's your focus over this 4-game series?
Yeah, I think we've got a better chance of seeing Ben Verlander at Citi Field than Justin Verlander these days. And obviously their overhaul for the Mets signaled something that none of us really thought was going to be the case back on opening day, but it is where they are, and they are who they are, and that is a team that's been struggling. I look at this series as a get-right opportunity for the Braves. You got to get right in the rotation. The offense has really been doing its thing, and this Mets pitching staff, as you just mentioned, is not as daunting as it once was. So I feel like if the offense can go in and pile up the runs, you could get a couple of quality starts out of some of these guys, and you're going to need one on that doubleheader day, and we'll see who the to-be-determined pitcher is going to be. I think Michael Soroka is probably the choice for the Braves in that one, but you've got to get some innings out of the starting rotation in order to fortify your bullpen. Will we see Dylan Lee get back at some point this weekend? Is another good question to ask, because the bullpen certainly is going to get tired and more tired, and going to be asked to cover more innings over the course of the next 4 days, or 3 days and 4 games. So I'm interested to see how exactly the Braves tackle that. But it all, I think, does boil down to, can the rotation give the Braves more than it has of late? Because how long can this struggle go on to find your way through 5 innings, beyond 5 innings, or some Braves pitcher to maybe get into the 7th or even the 8th inning? I know that sounds crazy, but I do think that's going to happen again before the year's over.
Well, since the trade deadline, the Mets are 21st in WRC plus, 24th in runs scored. The pitching staff has the 8th highest ERA, but there's obviously still some very dangerous players in this lineup. Francisco Lindor, 9th in baseball in F4. Pete Alonso has 35 homers. Brandon Nimmo's hitting 18% above league average. Francisco Alvarez, 21 home runs, lead all catchers. But Morton, Strider, Chirinos, all scheduled to start in the second game of the doubleheader on Saturday, as you mentioned, is currently listed as TBD. But there's still enough firepower in this Mets lineup to, I think, be a little bit worried about Morton and Chirinos' recent issues. And let's not forget, the Mets have simply had Spencer Strider's number, a 7.23 ERA, 4 homers in 23 2/3 innings, including 5 starts against him. The rotation has been a major talking point of late, and I just think that figures to be the case over these 4 games at Citi Field.
Yeah, it definitely could be. I feel like we've talked about it enough on this episode, certainly, to cover all of our bases here, but it's got to turn around at some point, and I don't see why it couldn't turn around over the course of the weekend against a team that's been struggling, that's underperformed offensively, that underperformed enough so that they had a bit of a mini fire sale at the trade deadline, and it's not the competitor that you thought it was going to be, or the rivalry that you thought it was going to be this season. But the Mets would certainly love to add to the Braves' miseries, especially in the starting staff, and particularly, I think, for Spencer Strider. This is always a litmus test for him. Can he bounce back and give us a good start? If you're the Braves, we'll find out, because the Mets, as you mentioned, have often had his number, and maddeningly so in some games, where it just feels like that one bad inning catches up with him. And we saw in the Pittsburgh series how bad one bad inning can be.
Well, and now they're going to have to deal with a Spencer Strider who might have a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, so that could be a bad combination for the Mets. Don't forget, we've always got you covered here on BPTV, so be sure to subscribe, turn notifications, and help spread the word. Until next time, I'm Cory McCartney. He's Graham McAuley, and we'll see you soon, Braves Country.